On May 23, around 9:15 a.m., the posse was still hidden in the bushes and about to give up when they heard a vehicle approaching at high speed. They hoped Barrow would stop and speak with Methven, positioning their vehicle near the posse's position in the bushes. The vehicle turned out to be a Ford V8 with Barrow behind the wheel, and he slowed down as planned. While the vehicle was still moving, the 6 cops opened fire. Oakley took the first shot. Barrow was killed instantly after being shot in the head. The officers fired approximately 130 rounds, emptying their weapons into the car. During their run-ins with the law, the two had received several bullet wounds. This was not one of those run-ins. Welcome back. As always, don't forget to like and subscribe to the Past Crimes channel. Bonnie Elizabeth Parker, the second of 3 children, was born in Louisiana, Texas in 1910. Charles Robert Parker, Bonnie's father, was a bricklayer who died when Bonnie was just 4 years old. Emma Parker, her widowed mother, relocated her family to Cement City, an industrial suburb in West Dallas, where she worked as a seamstress. Bonnie wrote poems as an adult, including The Story of Suicide Sal and The Trail's End, the latter of which became known as The Story of Bonnie and Clyde. Bonnie met Roy Thornton in high school. On September 25, 1926, 6 days before her 16th birthday, the couple dropped out of school and married. The marriage did not last long. Although they never divorced, their paths never crossed again after January 1929. Bonnie returned to Dallas to live with her mother and work as a waitress. Ted Hinton, a postal worker, was one of her regular customers. He joined the Dallas County Sheriff's Department in 1932 and eventually became a member of the posse that would hunt down Bonnie and Clyde. Clyde Barrow was born in 1909 in Ellis County, Texas, southeast of Dallas, to a poor farming family. He was the 5th of Henry Barrow and Cumie Walker's 7 children. The family moved to Dallas in the early 1920s as part of a larger migration pattern from rural areas to the city, where many settled in West Dallas, an urban slum. The Barrows lived under their wagon for the first few months in West Dallas until they saved enough money to buy a tent. Barrow was arrested for the first time in late 1926, at the age of 17, after fleeing when police confronted him about a rental car he had failed to return on time. Soon after, he was arrested along with his brother, Buck, for possession of stolen turkeys. During the years 1927 to 1929, Barrow worked some legitimate jobs, but he also cracked safes, robbed stores, and stole cars. He met Bonnie, aged 19, through a mutual friend in January 1930, and they spent a lot of time together over the next few weeks. Their romance was shattered when Barrow was arrested and convicted of auto theft by Sergeant Bert Wisnant. He escaped from the prison farm using a weapon Bonnie smuggled to him shortly after his incarceration. He was apprehended shortly after and returned to prison. While in prison, Barrow was repeatedly sexually assaulted, and he retaliated by attacking and killing his tormentor with a pipe, crushing his skull. Although this was his first murder, another inmate serving a life sentence claimed responsibility. Clyde's mother had successfully petitioned for his release without his knowledge. On February 2, 1932, he was released from Eastham, a hardened and bitter criminal. Something awful must have happened to him in prison, his sister, Marie, said, because he wasn't the same person when he got out. Clyde changed from a schoolboy to a rattlesnake, according to fellow inmate Ralph Fultz. Following Clyde's release from prison in February 1932, he and Fultz began a series of robberies targeting stores and gas stations in order to amass enough money and firepower to launch an attack on Eastham Prison. Bonnie and Fultz were apprehended on April 19 during a failed hardware store burglary in Kaufman in which they intended to steal firearms. Bonnie was released from prison after a few months when a grand jury failed to indict her, Foltz was tried, convicted, and sentenced. He never joined the gang again. Clyde was the getaway driver in a Hillsborough robbery on April 30th, during which store owner J.N. Booker was shot and killed. The wife of Booker recognized Clyde from police photographs as one of the shooters, despite the fact that he had remained inside the car. Clyde, Raymond Hamilton, and Ross Dyer were drinking moonshine in the parking lot of a country dance in Stringtown, Oklahoma, on August 5th, when Sheriff C.G. Maxwell and Deputy Eugene C. Moore approached them. Clyde and Hamilton opened fire, killing Moore and injuring Maxwell severely. Moore was the first of 9 law enforcement officers murdered by Clyde and his gang. W.D. Jones had known Clyde's family since he was a child. At the age of 16, he joined Bonnie and Clyde on Christmas Eve 1932, and the three fled Dallas that night. Jones and Clyde murdered Doyle Johnson, a young family man, on Christmas Day of that year, while stealing his car in Temple. On January 6, 1933, Clyde killed Tarrant County Deputy Malcolm Davis when he, Bonnie, and Jones wandered into a police trap set for another criminal. Since April, the gang had murdered 5 people. Clyde's brother, Buck, was granted a full pardon and released from prison on March 22, 1933. He and his wife Blanche met Bonnie, Clyde, and Jones in a temporary hideout at Oak Ridge Drive in Joplin, Missouri. In the quiet neighborhood, the group played loud, alcohol-fueled card games late into the night. On April 13th, police assembled a 5-man team in 2 cars to confront suspected bootleggers at the Oak Ridge Drive address. The Barrow brothers and Jones opened fire, killing Detective Harry L. McGinnis and fatally injuring Constable J.W. Harriman. The group eluded the cops in Joplin, but they left most of their belongings behind, including Buck's parole papers, 3 weeks old, a large arsenal of weapons, a handwritten poem by Bonnie, and a camera with several rolls of undeveloped film. They attempted to rob a bank in Lucerne, Indiana, and robbed a bank in Okabena, Minnesota, in May. They kidnapped Dillard Darby and Sophia Stone in Ruston, Louisiana, while stealing Darby's car. This was one of several incidents in which they kidnapped police officers or robbery victims between 1932 and 1934. They usually released their hostages far from home, sometimes with money to assist them in returning home. The Barrow gang shot anyone who got in their way, whether it was a police officer or an innocent civilian. Hamilton, Jones, Buck, and Henry Methvin were among the other gang members who committed murder. The cold-bloodedness of their murders eventually opened the public's eyes to the reality of their crimes. On June 10th, while driving with Jones and Bonnie near Wellington, Texas, Clyde failed to see warning signs at a bridge under construction, and the car flipped into a ravine. Bonnie was injured and couldn't walk. She either hopped on her good leg or was carried by Clyde. They enlisted the assistance of a nearby farm family before kidnapping Collinsworth County Sheriff George Corey and City Marshal Paul Hardy and chaining them to a tree outside Eric, Oklahoma. Buck and Jones botched a robbery and murdered Alma, Arkansas, Town Marshal Henry D. Humphrey. Despite Bonnie's critical condition, the criminals were forced to flee. The gang stayed at the Red Crown Tourist Court south of Platte City, Missouri, in July 1933. Clyde and Jones went shopping in town for bandages, crackers, cheese, and atropine sulfate to treat Bonnie's leg. The druggist contacted Sheriff Holt Coffey, who placed surveillance on the cabins. Law enforcement in Oklahoma, Texas, and Arkansas had warned Coffey to be on the lookout for strangers looking for such supplies. Captain Baxter was contacted by the sheriff, who requested reinforcements from Kansas City, including an armored car. At 11 p.m., Sheriff Coffey led a group of officers to the cabins. The gang had evaded the law once more in the ensuing gunfight, but Buck had been wounded by a bullet that blasted a large hole in the bone of his forehead, exposing his injured brain, and Blanche had been nearly blinded in both eyes by glass fragments. On July 24th, the Barrow gang camped at Dexfield Park, an abandoned amusement park near Dexter, Iowa. Officers determined that the campers were the Barrow gang after locals noticed their bloody bandages. Local police officers and about 100 spectators surrounded the group, and the Barrows were soon attacked. Clyde, Bonnie, and Jones made their escape on foot. Buck was shot in the back, and the officers apprehended him and his wife. Buck died 5 days later at King's Daughters Hospital in Perry, Iowa, of his head injury and pneumonia. The gang risked a run to Dallas in early September to see their families for the first time in 4 months. Jones parted ways with them, heading to Houston, where his mother had relocated. On November 16th, he was arrested without incident and returned to Dallas. They narrowly avoided arrest on November 22nd while attempting to meet with family members near Sowers, Texas. Smoot Schmid, Deputy Bob Alcorn, and Deputy Ted Hinton were all waiting nearby. Clyde sensed a trap as he drove up and passed his family's car, at which point Schmid and his deputies stood up and opened fire. Bullets flew through the car, striking both Bonnie and Clyde's legs, but they escaped later that night. On November 28th, a Dallas grand jury indicted Bonnie and Clyde for the murder of Tarrant County Deputy Malcolm Davis in January of that year. Nearly 10 months earlier, it was Bonnie's first murder warrant. Clyde orchestrated the escape of Hamilton, Methvin, and several others in the Eastham breakout on January 16, 1934. During his escape, Barrow gang member Joe Palmer shot Major Joe Crowson, who died a few days later in the hospital. The Texas Department of Corrections approached former Texas Ranger Captain Frank Hamer and convinced him to go after the Barrow gang. He was retired, but his commission was still active. He accepted the assignment as a Texas Highway Patrol officer and was later assigned to the prison system as a special investigator and was tasked with bringing down the Barrow gang. By May 1934, Clyde had 16 outstanding warrants in 4 states for multiple counts of robbery, auto theft, escape, assault, and murder. Hamer had studied the gang's movements and discovered that they swung in a circle around the edges of 5 Midwestern states, taking advantage of the state line rule that prohibited officers from pursuing a fugitive into another jurisdiction. Barrow's movements were consistent, so Hamer plotted his path and predicted where he would go. The 4 Texas posse members were in Shreveport on May 21st when they learned that Bonnie and Clyde were planning to visit Ivy Methvin in Bienville Parish. The entire posse planned an ambush on Louisiana State Highway 154 south of Gibbsland, heading toward Sales. Hinton stated that the cops arrived at 9 p.m. and stayed until the next day with no sign of the perpetrators. On May 23rd, around 9:15 a.m., the posse was still hidden in the bushes and about to give up when they heard a vehicle approaching at high speed. They hoped Barrow would stop and speak with Methvin, positioning their vehicle near the posse's position in the bushes. The vehicle turned out to be a Ford V8 with Barrow behind the wheel, and he slowed down as planned. While the vehicle was still moving, the 6 cops opened fire. Oakley took the first shot. Barrow was killed instantly after being shot in the head. The officers fired approximately 130 rounds, emptying their weapons into the car. During their run-ins with the law, the 2 had received several bullet wounds. This was not one of those run-ins.